The chair will allow on YouTube. I'd like to begin the meeting.
Thank you. And welcome to this meeting of the Windsor and Ascot Development Management Committee on Thursday, the 1st of August, 2024. My name is Councillor Mark Wilson and I shall be chairing this meeting. The meeting is being held in person and via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. Firstly, it would be useful if all committee members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they're undertaking. So as I say, I'm Councillor Mark Wilson and Chair.
Hi, I'm Councillor Julian Teasey, voting a member of the panel.
Councillor Amy Teasey, a voting member of the panel, and I'm substituting for Councillor Devon Davis.
Councillor Carol Da Costa, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Jodie Grove, voting member of the panel, and I'm a substitute for Councillor David Buckley.
Councillor Alison Carpenter, voting member of the panel.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Julian Sharp, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Sarnara Loxton, voting member of the panel. Voting member of the panel.
Mikey Lloyd, Democratic Services Officer.
And Mudley, Democratic Services Officer.
Tom Hughes, Senior Planning Officer.
David Brett, Senior Planning Officer.
Jo Richards, Development Management Team Leader.
Louise Reid, Deputy Head of Planning.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just we've got Helena as well online.
Sorry,
Would she like to introduce herself?
Yep. Good evening. Helena Stevenson, Principal Lawyer and Deputy Monitoring Officer, and I'm the Legal Advisor to the panel this evening.
Thank you. Thanks both. So the public are aware various councillors who I have not specifically asked to introduce themselves may also be attending this meeting, including virtually via Zoom. This, however, is in an observing capacity only, as there is no right for councillors who are not members of the committee or have not formally registered to speak in advance to play an active role in the meeting this evening. The attendance of any councillors in this capacity should be reflected via the member attendance records once the meeting has concluded. I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking if appropriate. I will also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I am able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. So we will now start on the agenda items. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Devon Davies has given his apologies and is being substituted by Councillor Amy Teasey. Councillor Buckley has given his apologies and is being substituted by Councillor Grove. And Councillor Knowles has also given his apologies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Good. Thank you. So agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of June. They've been circulated. Are there any comments on those in terms of being a true or accurate record? I'm so happy to adopt. Thank you. So now if we move to agenda item 4, which is the proposal on 119, 120 High Street in Eton. And if I can ask the officers to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. The first application to be heard tonight relates to a site at 119 and 120 High Street, Eton. The proposal is for a new mansard roof and alteration to the fire escape at the rear of the building. The application site, outlined in red, lies to the west of Eton High Street and comprises 2 attached buildings, numbers 119 and 120 High Street. The buildings are occupied as offices. The site lies within Eton Conservation Area, the boundary of which is outlined in red. Number 119 is a listed building. Number 120 is not listed. To the north, south, and opposite the site lie other listed buildings, shown in purple on the slide. This slide shows the existing site plan. There is a parking area to the rear of the buildings. This slide shows the proposed mansard roof to be sited on building number 120. No alterations are proposed to number 119. Listed building consent is therefore not required. In terms of a more detailed look at the heritage context, this slide shows listed building number 119 in red and non-listed building number 120 in green. Other listed buildings surrounding the site are outlined in purple. It is important to note that whilst number 120 is not a listed building, it is one of an important group of buildings along with number 119, 118 and 118A, which together make a positive contribution to the streetscape with their traditional Georgian appearance. This slide shows the heritage context within the street scene and the important group of buildings, numbers 118, 118A, 119 and 120 to the left of the slide. The buildings have modest parapets and traditional fenestration. This slide shows the proposed mansard roof and raising of the parapet above that of the remaining buildings within this important group. The mansard contains large windows which do not reflect the building lines or character currently prevalent on the front elevation. The mansard is to be constructed with slate. The rear elevation shows the proposed roof additions and the increase to the height of the rear fire escape. This slide shows the existing and proposed side elevation as viewed from the north. This slide shows the existing and proposed side elevation from the south. This demonstrates the increase in height of the parapet and addition of the mansard compared to the neighbouring listed building, number 119. This slide shows the existing and proposed street scene. The form, design and fenestration of the proposed mansard being starkly different to the roof form of other buildings within the existing group. The building to the north, number 121 to 123, contains a mansard roof, but this is an historic one, and the upper part is hipped away from the edges of the building, which lessens the prominence. This slide shows the existing and proposed ground floor plan. A ground floor amenity area is to be created to serve the offices. This slide shows the existing and proposed first floor plans with minimal changes. This slide shows the existing and proposed second floor plan, again with minimal changes. These slides show the proposed third floor and roof plan. An additional 89 square metres of office floor space would be created and used in connection with the existing office business. This floor area would be within the mansard roof. A front roof terrace would also be created, which is an uncommon feature within the street scene. The existing vehicle and pedestrian access to the north of the site would be retained. The rear of the site is to remain unchanged. These photos show the existing group of buildings within the street scene. Number 120, where the parapet extension and mansard roof addition would be sited, forming a strong relationship with the neighbouring listed buildings to the south. This slide shows further images of the existing buildings in their setting. This image shows how the proposed mansard and parapet extension would appear within the street scene. The Conservation Officer has advised that the proposal would result in less than substantial harm to the significance of heritage assets. The setting of the joining listed buildings and the character and appearance of the conservation area would not be preserved. This slide shows a photo and CGI image of the existing and proposed side south elevation. This slide shows a photo and CGI image of the existing and proposed rear elevation of the building. To conclude, the application would result in heritage harm, which has been identified as less than substantial. When less than substantial harm is identified, the decision maker must carry out a public benefits balancing exercise. In this case, the proposed development would provide a small increase to the office floor space. It has not been evidenced through the application that this floor space is necessary for the existing office use to remain viable. Limited weight is given to this as a public benefit. The application is therefore recommended for refusal in line with the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So for this item, we have two registered speakers, a public representative and applicants. So I'll call you in turn, and if when it's your turn to speak, if you could come to the chair, press the button on the microphone, and you will each have 3 minutes. So can I ask David Gibbons to come forward? Yes, once you start speaking.
Right, thank you for having me. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of my wife, myself, my 16-month-old son, and a daughter to be born in January. We live at 118 High Street, Eton, and we love our home and our neighbourhood. I am also speaking on behalf of my neighbours who live in 122A, 122, 123 High Street. 121 is not currently occupied, so I am speaking on behalf of every neighbouring resident. We have objected to iterations of these proposals since they were first submitted in late 2021, in 2022, in 2023, and now again in 2024. I know this is an altered proposal though. The response to the severe impact that they would have on the quality of life of all the families living around the offices was clear and unanimous in every iteration of our objections, and it was and is reassuring to see that the borough has acknowledged, endorsed, and developed our own concerns. The developer's covering letter of the 26th of March is where I want to begin, because it is rather telling how in the 12-page document the word residence is used just once. We are squeezed into 3 sentences on page 11 of 12, where our previously raised concerns are not even addressed. They're in fact said not to have existed at all. I quote, "The proposed mansard roof would have no adverse impact on the amenities of surrounding residents. No such concerns were raised in respect of this element in early proposals." Now, it depends on what you mean by amenities and this element. But contrary to this assertion, I'm here to tell the committee that we have objections, and here they are. The proposed works would result in harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, as already detailed, and to those buildings on either side, all of which are listed. The planning committee has previously explicitly recognised that this issue alone would outweigh any possible public benefits of the proposal. However, more concerning is the inevitable negative impact of the works that they would have on our living conditions. Previous feedback from the planning committee on different iterations of this proposal describe these impacts as unacceptable and having an overbearing impact on the neighbouring buildings, with drastic loss of privacy and lights. From a personal perspective, I live in 118A. Our bathroom and kitchen would be directly overlooked by this.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. So I don't really want people peering in at my bathroom and my kitchen. Even the developers acknowledge that there is a large and unlikely to be a large uptick in employees. The third floor of 119, 120 is almost vacant every Friday. This afternoon, I could see a sole occupant in there, and I am that close. And the culture shift away from the office working at home is only going to grow. So what we, the residents, will be left with if this proposal goes ahead is less light, a reduction of privacy, all for an empty floor that developers will want to use as a creative space. I did a bit of research on Zoopla. In nearby Eton, 2,260 square feet available on 137 the High Street. 12,952 square feet is free at Riverside House, and that's a stone throw, and I mean that literally, from 119 and 120. So when making your decision, we hope that the committee will bear in mind the fact that we live there, and this is not simply a place of work for us, but our home, and we go there, we exist there every day. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could now ask Kevin Scott for the applicant to speak.
So this is the
Oh,
applicant
thank you.
he has emailed to say that he isn't able to attend due to being in a flooding sort of bit of traffic. So he has sent through a speech that will be read out by my colleague Kim.
Thank you. Yes. So yes, if you can able to read that on his behalf. Thank you.
So the statement from Mr. Scott reads: Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I am Kevin Scott of Solve Planning, acting on behalf of the applicant, and Ben Wilcox of WAM Architecture, who unfortunately cannot be here this evening, but I know wanted to put the case for the application. I won't waste your time by going through the application history on this site, as this is set out in the report. This application is for a simple mansard roof extension, as shown in the presentation. There is a very simple assessment of balance required here, weighing any perceived harm against the planning/public benefits. I'm sure you're very familiar with Eton High Street, and I hope you will have had the opportunity of taking note of the various examples of mansard roofs, which are already an established part of the character of the conservation area, including those which are part of listed buildings. The application site is an unlisted building whose significance is described as negligible in isolation at 10.12 of the report. Whilst we feel it results in no harm, even if one considers that some harm will arise, it must be at the lower end of the very wide-ranging sliding scale of less than substantial, the rather clunky catch-all phrase used in the NPPF. Incidentally, this is not just our view. One consequence of the lengthy planning history is that different conservation officers have looked at these proposals, and the original conclusion was that the mansard element was acceptable. Given the context of the building and the presence of mansard roofs as part of the conservation area and a component of some listed buildings, this has to be weighed against planning benefits. The report considered this briefly at 10.17, and I'm surprised at how readily the benefits of additional employment space in this location are dismissed. You will all be well aware of the importance the council places on the protection and promotion of employment space in the borough through its local plan. This is reflected in the recent consultation on an Article 4 directive to remove the permitted change from commercial to residential in a number of locations. This is further reinforced by the neighbourhood plan, which seeks to promote the commercial viability and vitality of the high street. We would argue the provision of additional employment floor space is a significant public benefit underpinned by the council's own policies and aspirations, which comfortably outweighs any perceived harm from a recognised form of roof design which is subservient to the main building and designed to sit back and recede from view. I would ask that members consider these points, and I hope you will be able to come to a different view to that reached by officers in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for reading that out. So may I now open it up to the panel for questions, thoughts? Councillor Grogan.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify on a couple of the points there, just two of them, if that's okay. So first of all, just to clarify, it was mentioned just then about the existing mansard roofs, but it was mentioned in the report that the existing ones are historical, so actually there is no real comparison. I just wanted to clarify that. And the second point to clarify is, I haven't heard, it was mentioned in that speech about public benefit. I haven't heard any real concrete public benefit to extending this office. I just wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed anything. Again, I had also noticed or noted through my own looking at Rightmove and the like that existing office space is available to rent within the very local vicinity. So I just want to check that I wasn't missing any public benefit because I couldn't see any from what's been presented so far. Thank you.
Officers.
So the first question regarding the mansard roofs. So the presentation and the report certainly comments on the historic example we have next door at number 120, 123, I think it is. So we sort of described that that's a more historic example of a mansard. In terms of other mansards within the street scene, I can't recall any recent permissions for modern versions of those that have been added to historical buildings. So I think looking at that immediate context, the only example you have is a historic one, which doesn't compare. And then the second question about the public benefit that the applicant has put forward. Officers' response to that is that whilst they have suggested it might be of benefit to the existing occupiers of the building to increase floor area and modernise the office space, they have not put any real evidence forward that without that space, the existing business would become unviable. And indeed, they haven't put any evidence forward that there is a lack of other office space within Eton High Street itself.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on something that the applicant themselves mentioned in their words there about the commercial space and this need for commercial space. And they sort of said, well, buildings locally that have changed from commercial to residential are proof that this office space is needed. But actually, that doesn't quite make sense to me, because the fact that the property nearby can be switched to from commercial to residential shows that that space isn't actually needed as commercial anymore, and there have to be good reason to be able to just switch that because you need the residential. So that doesn't quite hold true for me. And just like Councillor Grove was saying, there hasn't been a strong argument for this to be put forward from the commercial reasons. I noticed it was called in, and that was one of the reasons that was put forward for calling it in, but that hasn't been demonstrated by the applicant to me or by anybody else speaking in favour of it. And you know, there are mansard roofs and there are mansard roofs, and clearly the one on the listed building is very different. It is hipped right back, and from the ground floor, I don't think you'd be able to see it as much. This does look very incongruous to me. It looks like the sort of modern mansard you see on office buildings, you know, much more modern office buildings, and it does look completely out of character in my opinion. So from what I've heard so far, and I'm, you know, willing to listen to any further arguments, but I'm minded to agree with officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm all in favour normally of developments which improve the area, enhance the street scene, and make it look more attractive. I think actually that this fails on virtually all of those counts. It doesn't make the street scene look more attractive. It doesn't, to me, sound like there is any particular public benefit, because we all know that demand for office space is decreasing incredibly rapidly with people working at home and all that sort of thing. So I can't actually see any reason why we would want to put more office space into Eton High Street, and more particularly, I can't see any reason why we would want to put more office space into Eton High Street using this particular design, which is, I think, very urban rather than very much in keeping with the conservation area, which is the key reason why we should be rejecting this and moving with officers' recommendation. So I'm quite happy to pick up on Councillor Teasey's recommendation of moving officers' recommendation and refusing for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor De Costa.
Was that a proposal? Has somebody going
I didn't actually make a proposal.
I don't mind whether I'm seconding you or whether I'm recommending it and somebody else can second it.
That's fine. I'm willing to propose it if nobody else is, that we accept officers' recommendations and look for a seconder.
Okay, can I just ask, so thank you for that. Can I just ask if there's any more comments? And where not everybody's spoken. Councillor Julian Teasey.
I don't really want to add to what's been said, which I pretty much agree with, but just wanted to pick up on one thing, just to make sure that we dot I's and cross T's. But one of the things that the applicant said was that there are other conservation officers who said that this was acceptable, but perhaps this was. I just wanted to clarify with officers if this is their understanding. It could be that he was talking about that they have approved mansard roofs, or that they accept the mansard roofs in the area. But as has already been said, there are mansard roofs and that are historic on one hand, and there are mansard roofs that are, look like they begin, that are less historic like this. But can I just clarify that? Because, as I said, apart from that, I can't think, I can't see that there is enough remotely to, in terms of economic benefits or anything that would make me think, well, hang on, let's not go with officer recommendations. But can I just clarify that, just to dot I's, cross T's?
Thank you, officers.
Yes, so this is the fourth. Yeah, this is the fourth application, I think, the fourth iteration we've seen. So the previous one was refused on heritage impact and other things. So there was a conservation officer objection. There were two applications prior to that for slightly different proposals. They were both withdrawn, so a decision wasn't made on those applications. But the applicant is right in the sense that there have been different conservation officers throughout the time. But certainly for this application, for the previous one that was decided upon, it's been a consistent approach that there is a conservation objection.
Sorry, can I just follow up on that? Sorry, just sure. Okay. Are there, as far as we are aware, in the area any similar things that have been approved on a conservation grounds in that conservation area for other developments, as it were?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I have, I guess, an observation just before we come to motions. I think for me, I'm also aware of the comments from neighbours about being overlooked, and I know there's a comment in the officer's report about sort of the developers agreeing to kind of obscure windows. But I think that's kind of also a factor. Is that a separate kind of like consideration versus the less than substantial harm, or is it kind of all wrapped up together?
That's a separate consideration. So in the committee report, you'll see in that section where we assess impact on neighbouring properties, we've got to ensure that we go through all the policy requirements, and in so far as the assessment on impact on neighbouring properties is concerned, we look to the proximity of neighbouring occupants. We look to the relationship between the mansard roof and the windows. We identified the proximity of that kitchen window and noticed that that the applicant had offered to obscurely glaze those, which may in turn alleviate any overlooking concerns. That would just tie off that policy consideration. It wouldn't in any way contribute to the sort of the balance, if you like, and overcome the heritage objection.
Okay, thank you. So any other comments? So can I maybe come back to Councillor Amy Teasey, as you mentioned it first about.
Carol actually made a proposal.
Okay, sorry.
And Julian was happy to second it, so
yes.
I'm all good.
Okay, no, that's fine. So if we can we just recap? Sorry, there was a little bit of confusion earlier. So Councillor De Costa, are you happy to could you just repeat your recommendation for the sake of clarity?
My proposal is to agree with officer's recommendation and to refuse.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table proposed by Councillor Carol Costa and seconded by Councillor Sharp to refuse planning permission in line with officer recommendation for the reason identified in section 15 of the report. We can now go to named vote. Councillors will be asked if they are for refusal, against refusal, or abstaining. So Councillor Carpenter?
For.
Councillor Costa?
For.
Councillor Grove?
For.
Councillor Luxton?
For.
Councillor Sharp?
For.
Councillor Amy Teasey?
For.
Councillor Julian Teasey?
For.
Councillor Wilson?
For.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you. So if we can move to agenda item 5, which is the land at 1111A Clifton Rise, Windsor officers.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5 has been called into committee. The site is located at 11 Clifton Rise in Windsor, and the application seeks full planning permission for the erection of a detached dwelling following the demolition of existing single-storey elements to the existing dwelling, along with the detached garage. The site is outlined in red, as shown on the location plan. The proposed site plan shows the proposed dwelling and illustrates a proposed site arrangement and how the development would interact with the existing dwelling and the immediate surrounding area. Access to the rear garden of the proposed dwelling would be provided either through the proposed dwelling or via an access gate, which would be accessed by the alleyway between number 11 and number 13. A new drop curb is proposed to facilitate the on-site vehicle parking arrangement. The update report acknowledges the response received to this application from the Highways team, which was provided on the 23rd of July, and sets out that the proposed parking arrangement is essentially what has already been approved at the site under application 2200715. To give additional context, the application follows a refused application at the site last year for a detached dwelling. This application was refused on the 18th of August 2023. There is also an extent permission at the site for an attached dwelling, essentially creating a free dwelling terrace, which was approved on the 2nd of March 2023. The details of the refused application, including the reasons for refusal and the extent permission, can be found in section 8 of the committee report. Turning back to the application before you, here are the proposed floor plans for both the existing dwelling and the new dwelling. The existing dwelling would remain a 3-bedroom dwelling, with the new dwelling consisting of 2 bedrooms. As set out in the report, the proposed dwelling is considered to provide suitable living accommodation for future occupants in line with policy QP3 of the Borough Local Plan. Here are the existing and proposed elevations and street scene elevations, which demonstrate how the proposed dwelling would sit within the site and provides context for the development along the south side of Clifton Rise. As set out in the report, the development is not considered to result in is considered to result in harm to the resident. Is not considered harm to. Sorry, I've lost myself. As set out in the report, the development is not considered to result in harm to residential amenity. Design of proposed dwelling, however, by virtue of its scale, siting, form and appearance, is considered to constitute a cramped and contrived form of development that would appear incongruous in the street scene. The scheme is considered to harm the character and visual amenities of the site and wider area. As the proposal is considered contrary to policy QP3 of the Borough Local Plan, policy DES 0.01 of the Windsor Neighbourhood Plan, and section 12 of the MPPF. In addition to this, the committee report sets out further reasons for refusal on ecology, biodiversity net gain and sustainability grounds. The recommendation is therefore to refuse planning permission, and on the screen now are some site photos. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have one registered speaker for this item, which is the applicants. So Kieran Grual-Lahal, if you could come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, firstly, Chair and committee members, for allowing me to speak today. I'm representing my brother, who is the applicant, Gagan Grual. So, hopefully you've all had an opportunity to view the presentation that was sent across last night, which is a bit of a visual aid to support some of the comments that I'm going to be making. So the Lang Estate construction started in the late 50s. Over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of aesthetic changes that have occurred. So what was once a relatively uniform estate, now each property has its own character, and there are very few properties that actually match. The planning officer is proposing refusal on 4 grounds. I would like to initially refer to points 2 to 4, which is around the net gain in biodiversity, the ecological survey and the sustainability statement. I also would like to be noted that there is a section 106 already on file for this application. These documents are already held on file. The planning officer has been in contact with my brother requesting documents. At no point have they contacted us to advise that they are out of date. We are more than happy to provide up-to-date reports for all of the above 3. I would like to stress that due to these reports were actually obtained in line with the first planning permission, which is for the terraced dwelling. There is no change in surface area of the property, so therefore, as I said, we're happy to provide, but there will be no reasonable demonstrated change on those. The primary reason for refusal is focused on street scene, appearance, design and character. I'd like to refer you to the pictures that I've sent across for 19 Clifton Rise, 72 and 74 Gaddies Road. These properties all have gables and the design is quite similar to the proposed for 11A Clifton Rise. And I'd also like to refer you to the comments made by the appeals inspector in reference to 74 Gaddies Road, where they do state quite clearly
1 minute remaining.
That there are a number of properties with gables in the local area. I would like to say that appearance is subjective, and one could argue that many properties on the Lang estate do not fit the street scene currently, but these are mainly due to maintenance reasons. What we're proposing is a brand new build property which will provide a gap in the market at the moment. With regards to the cramped appearance, I'd like to point out there are three detached properties on the north side of Clifton Rise, being 14, 16, 18. If you were to check the gap between those properties, they are less than 1 metre. The proposed gap between 11 and 11A is 1 metre. I believe you have pictures again to evidence that as well. The aesthetic appearance will also improve for the alleyway, as we are proposing an extra 20 centimetre gap between the end of the plot versus the alleyway. So there will be a clean line.
You're welcome to finish the sentence if you were mid-sentence.
Yes, it was just going to be that it's a more aesthetic view for anybody walking through the alleyway.
Great, thank you very much. So can I open it up to the panel for comments? Councillor Amy Teaton.
Thank you, Chair. There are some technical reasons for refusal. So the failure to demonstrate compliance with the climate change policy and the failure to demonstrate the net gain to biodiversity, those kinds of technical reasons, they can fall away if those things are provided. So, you know, as the applicant has just said, they could be provided. That's fine. But for me, it is this jarring nature of this gable on the street scene. You know, even if you appreciate what the applicant said about there being other gables in the area, and in fact the pictures that they've sent through of those, they sit much more comfortably within the frontage of those properties. Whereas for me, this gable just looks, the phrase is contrived, it looks sort of stuck on. It just doesn't fit the balance of the properties. And I remember the extent permission that stands there. I remember us granting that for the terrace. And the reason we did grant that was because we could see that it fitted in, it balanced, it fitted with what was already in the area, and it didn't jar, it didn't stand out too much, but it provided that additional dwelling space. You know, the Windsor Neighbourhood Plan and Delivery Group, they agree. It's just not right for the space. It's not right. And the Windsor and Eton Society, they also share the same sort of view that the scale and everything is just wrong. And it is just that design. It just doesn't quite sit right. It's poor design. So I am mindful to agree with officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the most important things that we should be looking at is the character of an area and the sort of architecture that there is in an area, and whether we like that or not, that's what is in the area and that's what it consists of. And if you look at the pictures here, and I've been down that road several times, and the surrounding areas, and there are different types of properties in the area, but the important thing is what is in the immediate area of this application. And there aren't any other houses of the type being applied for here in this application in that area. And what we seem to be doing is squeezing additional property in there to make smaller properties, and that changes the character of the area. That says to all the other properties in the area that if you want to split your house in two and squeeze more property in there, the borough will let you do that. And I just feel that this application isn't right for the area. It might be right in other locations, but in the location here, it just doesn't quite look right, doesn't look and feel quite right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Costa.
Thank you, Chair. I think the important thing that we need to remember is that we're not judging this on squeezing another dwelling within that area, because we've already granted permission for another dwelling to be attached to the property. So that's not the issue that we're discussing today. The issue is whether or not that dwelling fits with the street scene and meets with planning regulations. And if you look at Clifton Ride, it does not. And it's probably slightly misleading to say that none of the houses in the Lang estate are the same anymore, because that's absolutely not true. I live on the Lang estate, and most of the houses still have a sympathetic street scene. And this would take it out of that sympathetic street scene into something different. And I think really we've got to remember there is already planning consent for a dwelling there. And I think we just have to go by what our plan regulations are and how this fits in with the area. And my big concern would be along that alleyway, because at the moment it's quite, if you look at that photo, you've got two garages on either side, but it's still quite light and you're still able to see quite well as you walk down the alley. If you had a full side of the building along one side, that might make it feel a little less safe walking down. So we've got to think about the other residents in the area as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Julian Teasy.
Yes, I really had a good thing about this one, because in theory, I am broadly I'm broadly in favour of more housing where that is appropriate, and so I don't necessarily have a problem in theory with someone saying, well, look, extra housing, so long as it is sympathetic, so long as other planning considerations are met, that to me is fine. So that's, to me, is not a problem, but I would completely concur, and I'm glad Councillor Costa mentioned the alleyway, because that was actually one of my concerns when I looked at that. That alleyway is currently, there are two garages, and it's bright and it's easy, and I can just see how just the sheer wall would considerably lessen that. And in terms of the character, I note that again, looking down, that yes, there is some variation, but on the other hand, to a point, there's variation in that area to the point. And I think it's important to consider mainly the houses in the immediate sort of vicinity, as it were. On that basis, I'm minded to go with officer recommendations to refuse this. So I think I'll put that on the table.
So is that a proposal for the motion? Yeah. Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Before we just move to that, are there any other comments? Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Just one technical point to come back on something the applicant said about documents having been provided. I think it was in relation to the section 106 that was secured as part of the extant permission. So yes, there was a section 106 in relation to that. There is not such a legal document been submitted or drafted or anything in connection with this current application. So we don't have that. Just to make that point clear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Amy.
Thank you. And also, sorry, just to clarify my comments before, I skipped a bit in my notes and was referring to documents from another application, but actually the point still stands that there are some technical objections which can fall away if those documents can be produced, but it doesn't, for me, overweigh the visual impact of the problems that are with those.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you. I agree with most of the comments, and most of the comments I had have already been addressed. But the previous application, does that have to be reapplied for if they decided to actually revert to that, or does that still stand? I wasn't sure.
No, there's nothing stopping the extent permission from being carried out. Yeah.
Thank you. And just a thought from me on this. I think the street scene picture on page 39 of our pack, which shows the two adjoining buildings, sorry, not the two adjacent buildings with gaps in between, the proposed dwelling does really stick out as having that little gap in between, and so that I think that does look out of place, in my view. So I concur with the views. So are we, any other comments? Are we okay to go to the vote?
We have a motion on the table proposed by Councillor Julian Teasey and seconded by Councillor Sharp to refuse planning permission in line with officer recommendation for the reasons identified in section 14 of the report. I will now go to a named vote. Councillors will be asked if they are for refusal, against refusal, or abstaining. Councillor Carpenter.
For.
Councillor De Costa.
For.
Councillor Grove.
For.
Councillor Luxton. For. Councillor Sharp.
For.
Councillor Amy Teasey.
For.
Councillor Julian Teasey.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
Okay, so that's unanimous and the motion carries.
Thank you. So if we can move now to agenda item 6, and the property at 12 Inkerman Road, Eton, Wick. Officers.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a replacement dwelling at 12 Inkerman Road, Eton, Wick. It is the 4th application for a similar sort of development for a replacement dwelling in the last 18 months or so. Each of the previous 3 applications were either withdrawn or refused. The application has been called in for determination by Councillor Davis if the officer's recommendation is to refuse planning permission. The site comprises an L-shaped plot with a narrow access between 10A and 14 Inkerman Road. The dwelling to be replaced is a bungalow, which is set back in the plot and entirely to the rear of the 2-storey principal part of the adjacent property at number 10A. The site backs on to 21 Bell Lane as annotated on the aerial image. As you can see in this site photograph, the site is viewed. This is the view of the site from Inkerman Road, with number 14 to the left and number 10A to the right. This is the existing bungalow as viewed from the existing driveway, with number 10A to the right. This is the view from the side garden in the L-shaped part of the plot, looking towards Bell Lane. And this is the view from the other end of that part of the garden back towards Inkerman Road. And then from the same spot, this is the view across the rear of the existing bungalow towards number 10A. This plan shows the existing bungalow in plan form, and you can note its relatively modest scale. This plan shows the existing sites and the proposed site. On the proposed site plan, the outline, the footprint of the existing bungalow has been annotated and is broadly square in shape. and you can see a direct comparison with the proposed replacement dwelling. There will be a very slight shift away from the boundary with number 10A, and a further slight shift further forward in the plot with the respective front and rear elevations moving forward. There would also be an increase in width of built form by approximately 3.5 metres into that L-shaped part of the plot in what is the existing side garden. The proposed development would equate to an approximate 60% increase in footprint above the existing dwelling. On these slides, you can see the proposed dwelling in more detail. It would be 2 stories, approximately 2.6 metres higher than the existing bungalow and raised above floodable voids. There will be dual gables to the front, one of which would be blank, and dormers to the forward and rearward roof slopes, as you can see here. The site then is located within flood zone 2, which is the key planning constraint that affects the site, and accordingly a site-specific flood risk assessment has been provided. In this location, a replacement dwelling would be expected to comply with the Environment Agency standing advice and demonstrate that the acceptance test set out in the NPPF is passed. The proposal is relying on the incorporation of floodable voids to demonstrate appropriate flood resilience measures. Based on the information that has been submitted, officers are not clear that the proposed floodable voids would be capable of mitigating risk during a flood event. This is due to officers not being clear that the top of the void would be above the modelled flood level, and also that full details of the voids themselves haven't been provided in terms of the grills, how they would be maintained, how they would be prevented from becoming obstructed and so forth, which during a flood event would serve them, they wouldn't serve their purpose. The issues we have with the lack of information on the voids is compounded by the significant increase in built footprint on the site, which is approximately 60% greater than it currently exists, which would result in a resultant reduction in available floodplain storage capacity for the site, which in a flood event could pose flood risk to the site and to the surroundings. The second reason for refusal is on design grounds. Officers consider the overall design to be poor. This is in terms of the siting of the dwelling, its scale, its form, and its overall appearance. We consider the proposed replacement dwelling to introduce a cramped and incongruous form of development. Moving on, this slide has been submitted with the application and is titled Allowable Cloped Extensions. It is presumed by officers that this plan has been submitted to inform the footprint of the proposed replacement dwelling and to demonstrate what could be done on the site without planning permission. The allowable cloped extensions as per this plan are in the form of single-storey side and rear extensions. Firstly, no lawful development certificate has been applied for to confirm that these hypothetical extensions could be undertaken without planning permission. Secondly, the hypothetical rear extension would not constitute permitted development in any case, as it would not meet all of the criteria of Class A. The extract in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide shows a historic image of 12 Inkerman Road with a projecting rear element. This includes a side extension beyond which the proposed hypothetical rear extension would extend, and accordingly would fail to comply with one of the relevant parts of Class A to which it would be considered. Thirdly, the hypothetical extensions that are proposed here are relatively modest single-storey additions to a bungalow and quite different to the scale of the replacement dwelling that is proposed. On the basis of these three matters, we give this fallback position very limited weight. Moving on. The development proposed is required to have no unacceptable impact on the amenities of neighbouring occupiers. This is considered under policy QP3 in the Borough Local Plan, with detailed guidance set out in the Borough-wide Design Guide. The Borough-wide Design Guide establishes separation distances between properties to ensure an appropriate level of privacy would be achieved for both occupants of the proposed development and neighbouring occupiers. This is set out on the slide. An extract of table 8.1 has been included. As is clear from this plan, the proposal has a rear-to-rear relationship with the adjacent property at 21 Bell Lane, and in accordance with table 8.1, this would require a rear-to-rear separation distance of 20 metres. The annotation to the plan shows the rear-to-rear relationship between the application proposal and 21 Bell Lane to be approximately 15 metres, which is a significantly less than is required by the separation distance. In addition, three dormers, one of which directly is opposite number 21, is proposed. This dormer window would look directly onto the rear of 21 Bell Lane, and so the separating distance will not be achieved. This is considered to result in a significantly poorer level of amenity for the occupiers of number 21, including a loss of privacy through direct overlooking. This next slide shows a different aspect of neighbouring amenity that's considered in Borough-wide Design Guide, which requires that habitable rooms are provided with good quality daylight and sunlight access levels. Again, I've included an extract from the design guide. This shows figure 8.5, which establishes the 45-degree rule. The 45-degree rule is taken from the source of the 45-degree rule is BRE Guide to Daylighting and Sunlighting. The 45-degree rule essentially seeks to prevent habitable rooms not achieving suitable daylight and sunlight access. On this plan, I've annotated a approximation of how the 45-degree rule would be applied to the adjacent property at number 10A. As you can see, the 45-degree line encroaches through a significant part of the proposed replacement dwelling, approximately across its ridge line, and a significant portion of the proposed replacement dwelling would encroach and break that 45-degree line. On this basis, it is considered that a visual dominance, overbearing effect, and a significant loss of natural light would occur to number 10A. Finally, two technical reasons for refusal relating to a lack of energy assessment or sustainability assessment being provided with this application. We are therefore unable to confirm whether our commitments towards climate change will be met. And finally, based on the information supplied with the application, there has been no demonstration of a net gain in biodiversity by a quantifiable method. This is directly contradictory what is stated in the design and access statement. In the absence of this information, a reason for refusal is included. For each of these reasons, the application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have two registered speakers, the applicant and councillor. So can I ask David Howells for the applicant to come forward? And you'll have 3 minutes from when you start speaking at the microphone to press the button to activate the microphone.
Good evening, my name is David Howells, Director of DMH Planning, and I'm here representing the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Maskell. In respect to the first reason for refusal, the officer states that they do not feel sufficient evidence has been provided with regards to addressing flood impact and raises concerns about the use of voids. However, this appears to be contrary to other applications in flood risk zone 2, and in particular where the council have conditioned the detail of voids to be provided, and also a condition that the officer themselves have included in their determination of application 22/02526 in Old Ferry Drive in Wraithbury. The council should be consistent in their assessment of such proposals and use that condition in this instance. For the second reason for refusal listed, the scheme is not cramped or incongruous. It is a replacement dwelling that reflects the scale and size of other dwellings within the immediate vicinity. The scheme provides over 100 square metres of usable rear garden space, which is more than sufficient for a proposed 3-bedroom property. There's also sufficient parking for 3 cars at the front of the site. This confirms the replacement dwelling would not appear cramped within the site. It is of a suitable design compliant with policy QB3 that would enhance the local area when considering the design and appearance of the existing dwelling, which would remain at the site if the scheme were not to be allowed. When considering potential impacts on neighbours, as listed in reasons 3 and 4, it is important to remember that property could be extended through permitted development. It could create a gabled roof form and add a rear dormer window under Class B of the GPDO. Whilst this has not been submitted to confirm this, it is a material consideration and would have a similar relationship to the neighbouring properties as the proposal does. The potential permitted development details submitted, whilst not all could be carried out, the officer has acknowledged, as you've seen, that some single-storey extensions could be constructed under permitted development, which would not only change the appearance of the dwelling to a mishmash of additions, but it would also not be required to be considered against flood risk assessments and would not require voids. Therefore, this would have a harmful impact on the setting, unlike the proposed replacement dwelling in terms of flood risk. It is not sure how the officers concluded that there would be a loss of daylight and sunlight to some habitable rooms of 10A Inkerman Drive when the application site is to the north of the neighbouring property and the solar orientation of the sun travels east to west on a southern axis, not a northern axis, so there'd be no loss of daylight. Therefore, we do not feel concerns about impact on neighbouring properties have been justified. Given that the property is a replacement dwelling, it would actually be exempt from needing to meet national requirements of providing biodiversity metric to have an application assessed against. And whilst details were not submitted with the application, the officer did not engage in discussing dealing with financial contributions or conditioning the application to provide detailed landscaping plans to provide new and enhanced biodiversity measures at the site, which would address any biodiversity requirements expected by the council. The applicant would have obviously completed a legal agreement for carbon offset if the officer was recommending approval. In light of the aforementioned points, I respectfully ask the committee to overturn the officer's recommendation and instead approve this application as it is compliant with the council's policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask now Councillor Devon Davies?
Good evening all. I normally approach these meetings by going through these for refusal and seeing if any don't make sense. I'm going to go through each one in no particular order. I'll start with the impact to neighbours. In a previously withdrawn application 24/00497/4, both neighbours have given letters of support. One has said, I think, submitted drawings show an improving the new structure. Show what an improvement the new structure would be. The existing structure is a very small building, and I feel the new building would be far more in keeping in our road, and therefore this planning application goes ahead. The other neighbour is far more succinct. Eton Town Council, who represent the people of Eton Wick and seem to have a relationship with all residents there, have also commented in favour of the plans. Another reason for refusal was the siting scale, form and appearance. These designs do not increase the plot size significantly, and it will still take less plot space from its neighbours, and the heights would be similar. Though a local plan QPV was also quoted, saying that new development should reflect and integrate well with the spacing, height, bulk, massing, and building footprints of existing buildings. This application seeks to bring the house in line with existing buildings. Look on Google Maps now, drag the man on and have a look around. You'll see that the neighbouring buildings either side and opposite 12 Inkerman Road are all two-storey buildings with different designs. It would be impossible for the proposed design to match 3 different buildings, but as things stand, the building most out of place is 12 Inkerman Road. The first site is also set back from the road by several metres, meaning it cannot be seen from the south, and it's only partially visible from the west. I urge panel members to give limited weight to any concerns about not being in keeping with other buildings. Unfortunately, there's some paperwork missing regarding biodiversity flooding in the council's carbon offset fund, and hopefully these problems can be addressed by adding conditions for any approval. The applicants wish to live out their retirement in an improved home. We are being asked to refuse this for the benefit of nobody and based on interpretations of the rules. I hope you see common sense and apply judgment so the lives of residents are improved by the planning rules rather than hindered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. So if I can invite comments from the panel, Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I agree that it would definitely enhance the area. It looks a very nice property, but I think the fact that the borders, you know, with the 45 degrees and the, you know, the amount that we have to border with the other property, I think that means that we, you know, we have to accept officers' recommendations. I don't think that, you know, there's anything that we can do to get around those 2 points really, which is a shame because I mean I certainly agree with the speaker, Councillor Davies. You know, it does look, you know, it does obviously look a lot better than the property that's probably there at the moment. But I think just that, you know, those points alone, I think means that mindful to accept officers' recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panel comments? Councillor Julian Teasy.
Yes, thank you. I have a lot of sympathy for both the applicant and Councillor Davis and the points they've made. And I have a number of questions really. I think that look, there are lots. I'm going to be honest here. There are lots of planning reasons that have been given here that so the bar has been set very high. But let's just go through them almost in reverse order, as it were. Numbers 5 and 6, I suspect, yes, could possibly be dealt with by conditions as required. So I think that the reason they are 5 and 6 is because of that. I must admit, I had the same question about light and this 45-degree. I really had to read it and read it and read it. So this would be just a question for the officers about the apparent detrimental impact to the amenities of 10A. Because yes, it is to the north, or it's the north, slightly north/northeast of number 10A, and that's not where the light comes from. So that's just a question to me that there's, to give that significant weight, I don't know if that is appropriate. I think the more interesting one is number 3, which is about number 21 Bell Lane and the distance there, which is, I think the officer report said that it was 15 minutes rather than a recommendation for 20. My question to the officers would be how much wiggle room is there, or is there none really? I recognise that 21 Bell Lane is not situated along the line of the main line of Bell Lane. It is set back, and so arguably because it's set back almost on its own, and it was there first, arguably, that might be a problem if there were to be any request for a 2-storey building at the site of number 12. But I just wonder, are they never going to get a 2-storey building for that reason, irrespective of all these other things? I know we have to look at the application in front of us, but that's a question I have on that specific, on number 3. On number 2, this idea, by virtue of its siting scale and appearance being cramped and incongruous, I'm actually minded to say no, I disagree with that, because actually as has been said, I mean, there are a number of ways you can look at it. First of all, it is the only property in that road that is a bungalow. It's the only one. And you could, and by that road, I'm not Inkerman, also Northfield Road, very similar. It is arguably incongruous by being a bungalow. Now, ideally, the plot would be further forward, but obviously number 14 means that it's probably not possible to build a property that was in line with the corner of the L shape, as it were. But the other point I would make about that is that yes, you've got that there's, even with this property, yes, there is definitely an increase in floor space, and that is material. And I get that's where I think the officers possibly, that weighs towards the officers. On the other hand, weighing against that, what you then have left is still a very reasonable garden, very reasonable area for parking for a few cars as well. So I'm not convinced by that in terms of the overall weighting of that. And then number 1, the flood risk assessment. Now, this is one that almost arguably forgets everything I've said before, because the reason it's number 1 is potentially the biggest one of the lot. We can only look at the thing in front of us, and so this may well be a reason that is a bit of a trump card. I am aware that the fields behind have been flooded just this year, And so there is a flood risk there. This is flood zone 2. On the other hand, there was a good point made by the applicant about other similar properties, and that may be, look, there's been 4 applications. If they were to come back with a 5th at some point in the future, should this not be approved tonight, I just wonder if officers could clarify on that. Sorry, that's a lot of questions there for officers, but hopefully I've tried to be specific.
Thank you. Yes, can I invite officers to comment on those points? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Starting in reverse order then. So on the flooding and the voids and the other site, off the top of my head, I don't know what application that refers to, but where floodable voids were agreed. I think it's set out in the report that the use of floodable voids, the principle of that is acceptable. I think the reason for refusal is we don't have the information before us to be satisfied that in a flood event they would serve the purpose they are intended to do. We would be looking to ensure that the top of the void is above the modelled flood level. We don't have that information. We'd also expect information on how the voids themselves be constructed, details of the grills, how the grills will be maintained, how the grill will be kept free of obstruction during the lifetime of the development, and we don't have that information. So whereby another site may have received planning permission in flood zone 2 for a similar sort of development, including voids, it's likely, if it got planning permission, that it did supply all that information. So for that's the reason why that information, that is a reason for refusal.
And I did just look up that permission, and it was for that reason. So the voids were designed in accordance with EA guidance on floodable voids. So we had the information readily available. We don't in this case.
Then going backwards from that, so on the design reason for refusal, I think it's acknowledged that the existing bungalow is of a different appearance to much of its surroundings. That's definitely acknowledged. I think it's important to note the siting, the site itself is almost a backland type site, being set back so far from the road and not being part of the frontage. I think the policy in the local plan relating to on that sort of consideration would require a new dwelling that is sort of in a backland position to be subservient and subordinate to those buildings that are on the frontage. So that would be in terms of its scale, its height, its bulk, all those kind of things. And we don't feel that this proposal would achieve that. I think, we also have concerns about the overall coverage of the site itself, but yes, we don't think it is sufficiently subservient in terms of the plot siting and the plot shape. On other things that were raised, in terms of the impact on neighbouring properties, I think the one in relation to light and number 10A, I think in the officer report, it's acknowledged that it's more of a combination of factors really. So it is considered that there would be some loss of natural daylight and sunlight to number 10A to the room in that property, but also that there'd be a visual dominance and a load-bearing effect to that property, and that is by virtue of the height of the proposed replacement being an additional story above the existing bungalow, obviously, and then its proximity to that window. So it's the combination of the height and the proximity that caused the conflict with access to natural light, also being visually dominant and overbearing. In terms of the impact on number 21, there is, as you mentioned, a short, in terms of the separation distance in the borough design guide, about 5 meters short, and in terms of I think you meant, would there be wiggle room? So I think it's been mentioned previously. We've determined the S application on the basis of what has been submitted. I think in this instance, the separation distance, or deficiency in separation distance, was approximately 5 meters, approximately 25%. That's significant in and of itself. In addition to that, directly facing number 21 on the rear roof slope is a dormer window, which compounds the issue in terms of loss of privacy. If hypothetically that were a blank roof, then potentially the direct overlooking wouldn't be as so harmful. But we're making this decision on the basis of the plans for us. And then I think the first point you mentioned was around conditioning the requirement on the sustainability statement. But we wouldn't be able to do that. We'd require those details prior to the determination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other panel comments? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think we've heard a lot about all sorts of things which are fixable in terms of information about flood risk and all of that sort of thing. I think all of those sort of things are fixable by the applicant in terms of what they're looking to achieve. I think the problem with this is probably the scale and bulk is the key thing, and the impact on neighbouring properties. Now, we have to decide whether that is significant and harmful to neighbours, or whether we actually don't care very much and we can let this go ahead. My suspicion very strongly is that whilst I actually quite like on paper the look of this design, and I think there is definitely a design that can work on this site, but my suspicion is that this particular design doesn't work on that site. So whilst it looks very attractive and all of that sort of thing as a paper exercise, it probably doesn't sit particularly comfortably in the sort of setting that it's in. And we have to look at just what is being proposed here, not what might be there at some future date. So my sense of all of this is that overall we should agree with officer's recommendation. So I'm quite happy to propose that we accept officer's recommendation and refuse planning permission on this one. But I really do feel that there's a solution that the applicant and people who are working with him could come up with, which would sit quite happily here, that it seems a big enough plot, there's enough space and that sort of thing to do that. But right here, right now with this application, unfortunately, I don't think it's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Luxton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I would refer to point 10.5, where the proposal where the NPPF, the Borough Local Plan policies SP2 and QP1, that does not meet this application either. So besides being the flood zone too, I think that also should be quite an important one to be taken into consideration. So that is what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Teasey.
Thank you. I'm just intrigued because this is the fourth planning application for this site, recent application for this site. And this one seems to be very similar to what's been submitted previously. You know, they're sort of very small, very minor changes. And I'm interested to know how much sort of pre-application engagement there has been with officers. Have they bought the pre-app service and gone through these sorts of issues? And you know, it says that there's this poor design of the blank gable, which I agree it seems strange to me to have this gable with nothing on it. But those kinds of things could be worked out, as Councillor Sharp said, with that pre-app, you know, engagement with the council to try and come up with something that would work on this site. And it worries me slightly that, you know, we've heard about the residents who want to live their retirement in a nice property. I'm concerned that their time and money is being wasted bringing us applications which we will have no choice but to refuse because they simply don't meet our policies. They're not policy compliant, and it's a waste of everybody's time, frankly, sitting here debating things that are so clearly, you know, 6 reasons for refusal. I've been doing this for about 5 years. We don't always get 6 reasons for refusal. It's frustrating all round. No, and I'm sure it's extremely frustrating for the residents who just would like somewhere nice to live. So the technical reasons we've talked about and the flooding and things, those sorts of things can so easily be resolved by discussion, by talking, by getting the paperwork sorted. So that's there. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that came out was that Councillor Davis was very keen to say that he felt that the bungalow was the missing link, that it didn't fit in with everything around it. And so he felt that was a good reason to justify this large development. But actually the officers have repeated in their report and now that actually the bungalow should be subservient. It's not meant to be matching those larger properties around it because it's in that sort of backlot position. And to make it so big actually isn't necessarily the right thing to do. And I think that's quite an interesting point of view to come to as well. Yeah, I just feel there's too many reasons here: the design, the scale, the overlooking of neighbouring properties, and the flooding. You know, it's great that the flooding voids are there, but we can't guarantee that that's enough. And we've got to think about the people living there and whether they will be safe and whether it will be a suitable place to live. So that needs to be in place. So for that reason, I'm happy to second the proposal to refuse based on officer recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Grove.
Sorry, I think Councillor Dees.
Oh,
Just a really quick point, because I think it bears noting, and I do agree with everything that Councillor Teesey just said, and I mirror the frustration as well, and that the residents and the applicants must feel. One thing I just wanted to state was I know that Councillor Davies also mentioned that neighbours had not put in any objections against this. I just wanted to bring that up because obviously we know, as officers have stated and the report stated and Councillor Teesey and everyone else has stated, this doesn't comply with a number of our policies which are there for a reason. So we have to be making this decision knowing that this house is going to be stood there for quite some time and neighbours will change. And we all know those stories where people want to buy a house and they have that moment of why did they let them build that when it's blocking the light or it's overlooked. So this is why those policies are in place, because this is for the long term and this house will be there for quite some time. So hence why, unfortunately, I do agree with officer recommendation as well.
Thank you. Councillor Julian Teesey.
I agree with a number of the points that have been made, but I do feel, and echoing what others have said, that there's an answer there somewhere. And I just feel that of the 6 reasons, the 5 and 6 are very much can be dealt with. I think the natural light, I appreciate that any high-rise building in whatever direction will have some detrimental effect, but there must be an appropriate weighting. The fact that it is to the north and not to the south, which would be a different matter. I think that in terms of the design, I think in terms of Bell Lane and the potential overlooking there, that's something that could be dealt with a different design potentially. I think then that leaves 1 and 2. Now there's a connection. There's a connection in terms of the sort of size of this. If this were to be a 2-storey, having the voids obviously raises the height, so that there is almost a necessary, a sort of a necessary balancing act there. Albeit it is just sort of, it just does seem a shame that would have to be, notwithstanding that this has to be quote unquote subservient. We look at 21 Bell Lane, that is not, as far as I'm aware, that is not a bungalow, and none of the other things are bungalows as well. I just feel that there is an answer out there to be had, but we have to look at what we have in front of us, and on this basis I completely agree. So that as a proposal be made and seconded yet. Okay, so I would concur that we can only look on what's there at the moment, and we cannot if for the voids only, but there are other reasons, we have to, I think, go with officer recommendations on this.
Thank you. Can I just add my thoughts? Just very listening to all the comments, very much agree with Councillor Teasey's comments about the. I think that there's definitely a solution out there. I think that the point about flooding, I don't believe any of the other houses around have flood voids, so I feel that is very surmountable. If we needed to. In terms of the subservient point, I think that's quite a matter of opinion, and I'm not convinced that's a really pivotal reason. The setback, I think the overlooking piece is where I'm struggling. I think, if I'm right in thinking, the neighbour at 10A, I'm not sure they actually have a side window that would overlook. I don't know if that would actually change the calculation or not. I'm presuming the calculation must be right, but that would be something I'd like to check. And then in terms of the blank gable, I noticed that there's one of the neighbouring houses also has kind of a blank space where you might have a window, but also the blank gable, I think, would overlook one of the neighbours, and there are 2 dormer windows on the plans. So I think that feels like they've actually adjusted to prevent the overlooking. And then the biodiversity and the carbon offset, again, they can be put into conditions. So I feel it's kind of very, very close. In my view, so I'm kind of just say sitting on the fence at the moment, but I would almost like a little bit more information around the overlooking and that angles piece. I don't know if there is anything you can add here. So I guess the specific question would be, if 10A doesn't have a side window, does that 45-degree calculation still hold?
So in answer to your question, 10A does not have a first floor side window. So the window that is affected, the window that was noted on the plan, is the sole window to that room. So it being affected is significant. It's not as if there's a secondary window that could provide further light or something like that. But there's the impact of lights, but then in addition is the light in proximity to that window, which is also considered to be visually dominant and overbearing on the occupant of that property.
Okay, thank you. Jo, do you want to come in on that
I
as well?
was just going to say, and I think it's been said here in the room tonight in relation to this item, none of these reasons for refusal are in principle reasons for refusal. The applicant can come to us and submit a pre-app, and we will help them design a proposal that seeks to overcome every concern that's raised. But every concern that's been raised is either because there's a conflict with policy, or there's a conflict with EA standing advice, or a conflict with the borough-wide design guide, and there are numerous conflicts, so we can't design it out tonight or a condition yet. So it is the case of them coming to us for pre-app, and us, which they haven't done. We've had 4 applications that are very, very similar, so that's what they need to do, and we will enter into that engagement with them and hopefully achieve something for them in that time.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready. We move to a motion.
We have a motion on the table proposed by Councillor Sharp and seconded by Councillor Amy Teasey to refuse planning permission in line with officer recommendation for the reasons identified in the report. I will now go to named vote. Councillors will be asked if they are for refusal, against refusal, or abstaining. Councillor Carpenter. For. Councillor Costa. For. Councillor Grove. For. Councillor Luxton. For. Councillor Sharp.
For.
Councillor Amy Teasey. For. Councillor Julian Teasey.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
Abstain.
So that's 7 in favour, 1 abstention. The motion carries.
Thank you. So moving to agenda item 7, now the planning appeals received and the planning decision report. We are asked to note those comments, note the contents of the report. Does anybody have any comments or any points on those?
Well, I did, but I changed my mind, so.
Okay. I guess the only thing I noted was that only 1 got refused and 9 were accepted. So that's good. Yeah. I think it's a good hit rate in that sense. But thank you. Okay. Are there anything else? Thank you. I'll close the meeting there. Thank you.
Thank you.